Ken Schramm, the man who wrote the book on mead making, joins me this week to discuss big, delicious meads. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 143. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 143, and it's late February 2017. This week, Ken Schramm, the award-winning founder of Schram's Meadery, joins me to discuss making big meads at home. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're running an amazing deal right now, only $19.99 for a one-year subscription or $17.99 for the digital edition. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers, and you can read my new column called Ask the Experts. Take advantage of their special deal now at beerandbrewing.com. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com. And also the Cornicle, a unique conical fermenter and kegging system all in one. The kegs feature a removable bottom, which makes cleanup a snap, and you can attach a unique conical bottom to the keg and use it as a pressure-capable fermenter. Ferment, keg, and serve all in one vessel with a Cornicle from Blickman Engineering. Find out more at blickmanengineering.com. And finally, BeerSmith software, the industry standard for home and professional brewers. It lets you design great beer recipes and brew with confidence. Download your free 21-day trial today from beersmith.com. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome Ken Schramm from Schram's Meadery. Ken literally wrote the book on mead making. It's called The Compleat Meadmaker. Ken was also a founding member of the Mazer Cup and has won numerous national awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Homebrewers Association. His meadery, Schram's Meadery, arguably makes some of the highest-rated meads in the world from fresh fruit, spices, and honey. Ken, it is an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Brad. Glad to be here.
Now, we've met a few times at HomebrewCon, but I think this is your first time on the show. How are things going at the Meadery? You said you've been very busy.
We are right now making meat as fast as we can, and pretty much can't keep it in stock. Things are going great. We're kind of trying at this point to balance our need to expand production and our quality of life. We're hiring additional people. Life is as good as it can be right now for us.
Yeah, you said you were interviewing somebody this morning. I think getting ready to expand even more, right?
Yeah, we're in the process of hiring a mead maker, and we will probably be adding, I would say, one or two more positions before the year is done. We grew at 150% over last year's sales, and our hope is that we can probably double or maybe even slightly better than that our production over the coming calendar year.
What's your capacity now, roughly?
Well, right now we have. I can't tell you exactly what our total liters of capacity are because we just keep adding tanks as fast as we can, and we have four production systems, four primary systems. One of them is the one that we started with, which is two 400-liter fermenters. We have two 2,000-liter fermenters and one 3,700-liter fermenter, and everything goes from the primary tank into a secondary tank and then into tertiary storage until it's clear enough to bottle.
Gosh, I can't imagine 3,700 liters of your mead. That would just sounds amazing to me.
Well, it's 3,700 liters at the start. That's the total capacity of the fermenter, and since you've got to leave room at the top, as everyone here knows, for expansion, and then the fruit cap itself consumes a good amount of that. We don't end up with 3,700 liters coming out of the tank. We start with 3,700 liters as a capacity at the front, and end up with maybe 3,000, sometimes less. Of mead going into secondary, and then there's always settling and lees that we leave in the secondary tank that doesn't go into the tertiary tank. So everything kind of gets scaled down as we go, but it's still large amounts of capacity, and it is truly amusing to me. I still just love to stand on the top of a platform ladder and look down on 2 tons of fruit. It's joy. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a simple man, and I love to have that smell waft up into my face, and I love to look at 2 tons of fruit. It's a lot of work to punch down, but it's fun.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, Ken, I do want to get into the details and nitty gritty of mead making because you're one of the guys that does it with a lot of fruit and makes it very interesting. I've tried a couple batches here. But before we do that, I wanted to go back in time a little bit. You were really involved in the resurgence of home mead making once home wine and beer making was legalized again. And I think you were an early founder of the Mazer Cup as well. How did you actually get started into making meads yourself?
Well, I started as a brewer. I've been interested in good beer since I was a kid. I probably shouldn't have been drinking when I was, but I remember early on wondering how good beer could be. I asked my dad what a great beer was, and he said he had gone to Europe as a child. I say a child. When he graduated from high school, he and his buddy took their bikes over and rode around Germany for a summer. And before he started college, he visited Dortmund and a lot of other places in Germany, and said he really liked Dortmunder Union. And so I went out and bought myself a 6-pack of Dortmunder Union. And at that point, I was hooked. I asked him that because I had consumed beers and liked to get a little buzz just like kids do. But when I drank things, the kind of commercial, what's been described as macro swill, excuse me, I didn't really enjoy it. And I wondered what this whole fuss about beer was. And when my dad said, I really like Dortmunder Union, I tried it, and lo and behold, it actually was delicious. It tasted like malt. It had a nice hoppiness to it, and I was hooked on quality beer thereafter, and really became a fan of it, and tried to buy it wherever I could. When I was in college, that was just as the Chelsea Real Ale Company was coming online, and so I was able to have some porters and stouts that Ted Badgerow was making in Chelsea at the time. That was eye-opening as well. I mean, they were delicious. They were full-bodied. They had terrific aftertaste, and I loved them. And so when my brother said, and my brother in 1987, for Christmas in 1987, he bought me a beer making kit with the complete joy of home brewing in it. I was a little reluctant. it didn't make sense to me at the time that you could make good beer at home, even though I was a baker and a pretty good cook, and I knew I could make good bread and cookies and whatever else, but it just didn't, click to me that, oh yeah, you can probably make just as good a beer if you do it yourself as you can bread. But then I went on that spring. I went on a fishing trip with my brother-in-law and my brother, and Mike had bought all of the guys in the family a beer making kit, and my brother-in-law Andy had made a porter, and it was phenomenal. It was terrific. And from that moment on, I was going to do this, and I was gonna learn what I needed to, and really kind of I'm a driven person. I'll admit it.
Passionate guy. I know you have a lot of hobbies too.
Yeah, I'm a passionate guy. And once I got passionate about brewing, I read Papazian's book cover to cover. That was the book that came with the beer making kit. Yep. I read it cover to cover, and there's it's right behind me right now. There's an appendix in the back on mead. And when I read those paragraphs, it was really compelling. Papazian spoke about mead in superlative terms. Great, the best thing since sliced bread. So I tried it, and I really managed to luck into some great fortune. My brother gave me the kit. I tried making mead, and I immediately joined the American, because let's do everything we can to get good at this immediately. I joined the American Homebrewers Association. My first copy of Zymergy showed up, and in the first copy of Zymergy that I got was an announcement that 5 people had become the first 5 nationally ranked BJCP judges, and one of them was Bill Pfeiffer. Bill was the Mead Maker of the Year in '84 or '85, I think '85, and was really integral in the whole BJCP program, getting it started. And he lived about 10 minutes away. So I called him up.
Wow.
And yeah, yep. And Bill was as friendly and forthcoming with information as he could have possibly been. He said, yeah, come on over, bring some beers, bring some meads. And he immediately offered me all kinds of advice to help make things better. And, and Bill was smart. Bill was a really brilliant guy, Dr. Bill Pfeiffer, a real, not an MD, but a PhD. And he got me started on the right track. He taught me about nutrients. He taught me about a lot of things. He taught me about water chemistry and all malt brewing and the improvements to the mead making process that I needed to engage in to make things really delicious. And my meads went from being what I would right now estimate as like a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 up to being a 7.5 or an 8. And that was it was just fantastic. Bill was really formative in my growth as a brewer. We brewed many batches together. We would brew 3 all grain batches in an afternoon, and we did that a couple of times a month for a few years, and that proved really helpful. But Bill was also so well connected that he got me introduced to people like Charlie and to people like Fred Scheer, who was the brewer at the time at the Frankenmuth Brewing Company, and it was just really helpful. In any case, we also joined together. Bill and I joined the Ann Arbor Brewers Guild, and that's where I met Dr. Dan McConnell and Mike O'Brien, and the three of us. We're all really interested in beer and mead. Mike had the idea of starting the Michigan State Fair Homebrew Competition to support brewers in Michigan, and I had the idea. I said, if we want to taste the best meads in the world, why don't we start a mead only competition and have people ship us their meads, which was what we did. We started the Mazer Cup, sanctioned it, and before too long we had.
Still the national competition for here in the U.S., right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. We started that in 1992, and it worked out beautifully. Before too long, people were sending us meads and also the recipes from around the world.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. You started same year I did in '87. Now, you eventually got talked into writing a book on mead, arguably one of the best books on mead, The Compleat Meadmaker. How'd you get talked into that? Well,
once we got started, once Dan McConnell and I got started on mead, our curiosity was pretty insatiable. We did an experiment in 1993, and that we presented at the 1994 conference, where we took 6 different yeasts and fermented them and fermented the same honey with 6 different yeasts. We also took 6 different honeys and fermented them with the same yeast, with one yeast. Mm-hmm. And then we took all 6 of those honeys and blended them together into a sort of a 7th blend, and then fermented that as well with the same yeast. And we published that in Zymergy. We published the results of that in Zymergy and did the presentation at the 1994 conference in Denver. Mm-hmm. That kind of started to build some momentum for mead, certainly, and also for our reputations. We kind of got to be known as the mead guys. Mm-hmm. So then in 95, we did another presentation at the conference in New Orleans, and we made we made the commemorative mead for that conference. We did a presentation on fruit beers at that conference, fruit being something that would eventually also end up being a long-term love of mine. Actually, it was a long-term love of mine, which is why we did a presentation on how to make fruit beers. And we did the same approach, brewed one beer and presented that with 7 different fruits. And Dan and I got a pretty good reputation at that point. We kept getting asked then to write more and more articles for Zymergy, which we did. It was really enjoyable. We did a couple of different things. The write-up of that fruit beer experiment, the write-up of a testing of immersion chillers for the Brewers Association, and a couple more articles about mead, about optimizing honey fermentation. Actually, the optimizing honey fermentation article came a little bit later, but more articles about mead making. And when the Brewers Association and a couple of other publishers decided that they were going to publish a book on mead, our names bubbled to the top of the list pretty quickly. We actually, in the course of about 4 months, we got 3 different offers from 3 different publishers to write a book on mead.
Wow.
And we got started. We picked one. We got started. We got bogged down. And Dan's a scientist of a pretty high order. He is a research professor at University of Michigan, and he eventually recognized that writing this book was not, the getting it finished was not going to be in his future, because he was too busy with other things. And he just said, Ken, go ahead and finish it by yourself. And right about that time, Ray Daniels contacted me from the Brewers Association and said,
right. He was the editor at the time, I think, right?
He was the editor. Yes, he was the editor at the time. He was the editor of the book, and said, we're looking to get a book on honey out, and we'd like to have you write it. And I said, okay, that'll be fine. And I took what I had already started with the previous publisher, who just said, off you go. And the previous publisher freed me up and to follow up on the offer from Ray. And I finished the book, and that's how the book came about.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Now, you eventually decided to turn this into a full-time business. I'm not even sure what you did as your day job before, but you opened Schram's Meadery not that long ago, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. We opened in September 26th, 27th of 2013. So we've been open for a little longer than 3 years as we record this. And I was a television production person. I started off in cable TV, and then eventually made some industrials, worked for a company that did contract production for places like CNN. And this was back in the 1990s for CNN and ESPN and ABC News. The whole time I'm a sports nut. I love my Red Wings. I love my Pistons. I was doing a lot of freelance camera operation for NBA, NHL, and college sports. And eventually the Palace of Auburn Hills called, and they had me be their production supervisor for a few years. Mm-hmm. When I was raising kids, that became a little bit crazy because I had 2 small kids who wanted me to be dad. And so I took a job in educational, professional development television programming for a few years, actually 20. And that's what I was doing in 2000, for example, when Bill and I were real instrumental in bringing the conference to Livonia, Michigan. And I did that up until the Meadery was on its feet. I was pretty successful at that. I don't want to sound full of myself or anything, but it's hard to leave a job where you have some professional success and a good salary and regular schedule and benefits and whatnot. It's hard to pull up your stakes and say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start a business. I knew all along that I knew all along that I made some decent mead, and I did want to. I had a lot of people encouraging me to start a meadery. I tasted what I was capable of making, and I thought it was probably commercially viable, but there's a lot involved in starting a business. You have to have some capital. You have to have a good plan. You've got to really have your ducks in a row before you get started. And I really wanted to make sure I didn't kind of go off half-cocked.
Yeah, and you got to figure out how to make a batch with 2,000 pounds of honey, or I'm sorry, 2,000 pounds of fruit instead of 10 pounds of fruit, right? Yeah.
You've got to be a little fearless too, because when you do something like this, you get to the point where, and it's funny for me because I was involved in live television production, so doing things that are a little scary and a little where you can have your heart in your throat wasn't new to me. But on the other hand, when you start a business like this, you spend a tremendous amount of time doing things that you've never done before, doing task after task for the first time in your life, and hoping that you get it right enough so that your business doesn't fail. And that can be pretty frightening. And to do that while you're trying to hold down another job that's relatively
intense,
demanding, requiring of a high level of skill and commitment. That was a little bit crazy.
I know how you feel, because I 6 years ago I took the leap with BeerSmith, and I had just like you, had a good job, had a salary, had a paycheck, and all of a sudden no paycheck, and it was I remember it wasn't a financial strain, but it was scary when I got that last paycheck.
Sure. Yeah. And as opposed to relying on other people to figure out what your benefits package looks like and what your schedule looks like and lots of other things, you're now steering, and that's both. I mean, it's thrilling and it's daunting. You lose a lot. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you lost a lot of sleep, and I did as well. And everybody that started a business has done that. So
it's a great experience.
That's how it came about.
Well, I wanted to actually dive in and start talking about some of your amazing meads. I've had several of them, but I know you do some spice meads, but I wanted to dive in first to what I would argue is your specialty, which is big sweet fruit meads, Melomels, if you will. Mm-hmm. I believe you generally work at the pretty high end of the high gravity end of the spectrum, right?
Yes, we do. Yes,
you start around 1140, 1150, probably something like that, right?
On occasion higher.
On occasion higher, yeah.
Yes.
And that brings a number of challenges when you start making those really big meads with a lot of fruit, right?
Sure. There are all kinds of challenges. Not least is the fact that if you're gonna make a mead with 2 tons of fruit, you've got to get 2 tons of fruit into a fermenter, and it doesn't walk up there by itself.
You just bring up a dump truck, right, and dump it into the fermenter?
Sure. Yeah, it's back it up, son. And no, we physically put that mead into the tank, and there's processes for how it all gets handled, but it's not quite. I mean, at this point we've gotten a lot better at it. It's not a day-long affair like it used to be, but it is involved, and you have to figure out how to get that stuff in there, and you've got to figure out the timing of how to be able to make it all work and start properly at the right temperatures. Mm-hmm. But it is involved, and we use a lot of fruit. I'm not gonna get into the exact ratios that we have, because I kind of consider this at this point a little bit proprietary, and
of course, yeah.
Our business depends on that, but we use lots of fruit. We use amounts of fruit that most people would consider obscene.
I'm gonna just take a guess here, but I think in many of your batches you're using as much fruit as you are honey, right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
if not
in
more.
Fact, when you read our labels, the TTB on a number of our labels, the TTB requires you to describe the amount of fruit by volume, not by weight, and mm-hmm. not by the contribution of the amount of sugar that the fruit is contributing, but rather by volume. And if we do legitimately measure it, it's not exactly precise, but I think our blackberry and other labels say 51% blackberries or 51% cherries, and it's
amazing.
It's it's a lot of fruit. We only really add enough water to kind of get the honey flowing and allow us to transfer it into the tanks, and we're still straining our pumps a lot of the time.
Right.
So we use a lot of fruit. No one says to grape wine producers, do you think it's too much to use 100% grapes? No one thinks it's too much to use 100% grapes to make a Pinot Noir. That's just what wine is. And we don't get to 100% fruit, but we do use a tremendous amount of fruit, and we use fruits that are really characterful. So we feel like we give, what we're trying to do is to give people a really pure fruit experience with our meads.
Mm-hmm. And I think they do. I've tasted a number of them. They're just fantastic. Now Now, earlier we said, let's talk about selections of fruit first, I guess. You like to play, when I talked to you earlier, you said you really like to play with tart fruits that will counterpoint the sweetness from the honey. So you get this sort of sweet tart effect when you have the finished mead, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is the fruits that we like to play with also have a big impact on your palate. Tart cherries, blackberries, red raspberries, black currants. These are all fruits that if you take a fistful of them, they are going to deliver a lot of impact just by the mouthful right out of hand. They're going to deliver more impact than, say, peaches or strawberries are. They're going to be lingering. They're going to have a tremendous amount of acidity. You're going to get that mouth puckering thing happening, and they're going to deliver an awful lot of afterlife. They're going to have a long aftertaste on your tongue. So those are the things that we like to do, and we do like to balance sweetness with acidity. That's the fun interplay that we like to mess with. We like to utilize fruits that have levels of acidity there that are many times higher, for example, than the traditional grapes that are used in reds and whites. Those red and white wine grapes can have levels of acidity adjusted for tartaric acid that are at, say, 0.6% up to maybe 1.2 or 1.4%. Mm-hmm. And some of the fruits that we use, like blackberries, can be as high as 3.5 or 3.8% acidity. And then you get into red currants, which are higher than that, and then you get into black currants, which are even higher than that. Which is
amazing to me, because you make a mead that is just black currants and honey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and black currants can have a level of acidity that's up to 8% acidity, and that's now you're talking about something that's potentially 10 times the amount that you would experience in a red wine. And the only way you can make something like that's palatable is to balance it with sweetness. If you fermented that to dryness, it would be offensive. It would be screeching and unpleasant. So we like to try and find a spot where the impression is both incredibly desirable and really memorable. And sometimes that means we leave really high levels of residual sugar in some of these meads. And to date, well, I mean, I can tell you, when we got started, we released the two of our meads at the same time back in I think it was 2014. We released our first black currant mead, and we also released blackberry sec. We did one batch of blackberry that. When we first got started, the fermentations didn't all occur in one single tank. At one point we had 3 tanks that we were using, and one of the tanks fermented to near dryness. And I said, well, we can blend it back together, or we can leave that tank aside, and we can experiment with it and see if we can make something that will be a really attractive dry mead. And I'm a big red wine lover. I have a cellar full of tremendous red wines that I've used. I mean, I drink them because I love them, and I've also used them to help educate my palate for what are world-class beverages. So when this blackberry went dry, I thought, let's see if we can't maybe do something with this to create something that imitates a traditional red wine, and we put it through a malolactic fermentation to soften up some of the acidity, and we released it as a mead called Blackberry Sec. It was tasty. To this day, it's still one of my favorite food-friendly wines that we make. And we also released it side by side with the first batch of Black Agnes that we made, the black currant mead. The Black Agnes was delicious. We left it at a sweetness level, though, that was the residual sweetness was so high that I thought people are going to be offended by this. You're going to say this is too sweet.
You thought it would be too cloying, right?
Yep, absolutely. I thought people would reject this mead because it was cloying. Well, we only released about 50 cases of the
black currant
blackberry sec, and we released about 3 times that much of the black currant mead. and they were released at the same time, and the blackcurrant mead screamed off the shelves. And the blackberry sec, which I still to this day love to eat with a big piece of lamb or a rib steak, didn't move. And it's a spectacular, for my money, it's a spectacular food mead. But it just didn't go, and people love that high level of sweetness. So I'm just going to respect what the consumer has told us. The consumers told us, yeah, we like that stuff, and to this day we can't release a batch of Black Agnes and keep it on the shelves for more than a couple of days.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you say residual sweetness, I mean you're starting your whole philosophy, I guess, is to start with a really high gravity, right, and then ferment it down to the point where the yeast actually peters out due to alcohol, right? Correct. So that's how you keep the residual sweetness, both from the fruit and the honey in the mead, right?
Correct. And we use 71B. 71B is a very it's a wonderful yeast because it has a lot of characteristics that we like. One of them is that it does not have the lower sugar tolerance that some yeasts have. Some yeasts don't like to start above 1.150.
Right.
Whatever that is in bricks. I'd have to do some quick math in my head, but a lot of yeasts don't tolerate high sugar levels, but 71B does. 71B also tolerates low temperatures pretty well, and it also is very it behaves well with respect to how much nutrient you give it. And so you can predict pretty accurately at given nutrient levels where it will go with its alcohol level. So
yeah, I've started playing with it, and it seems very predictable. I mean, from batch to batch, very consistent. It is. I should mention 71B is the Loveland 71B Narbonne wine yeast, correct?
71B-1122 Narbonne, Narbonne. It's the Narbonne strain. It's from southern France, and it's just it's a go-to yeast for us. Although it is not at this point, we're using a lot more yeast strains now. And what's nice about having been in business for a little while and having actually some money to use to experiment, we can do some more pilot batching with different things, and we're doing that with some of the products that we're going to have coming out over the next year or two to figure out which other strains may perform well. I want to say that Shea Comfort has been really helpful to us in helping to guide us towards some other strains that may perform extremely well with some of the fruits that we want to work with that we weren't having as much success with in the past. And now I think we've got some solutions to some of the challenges that we were facing, and thanks to him.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about some of the things you play with. I'm just going to list off a couple of the fruits that you play with so people get an idea. You play with blackberries, boysenberries, raspberries, blueberries, black currants. Let's see, apples, of course. I mentioned boysenberries. All these great flavors. Let's talk about something like your amazing headline mead, which of course is the Heart of Darkness, which you've been making for a number of years now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you put something like that together?
Well, the Heart of Darkness came. I've been spending a lot of time trying to educate myself on the quality beverages in the beverage alcohol world. When I first started drinking wine, I subscribed to everything I could find. I read a lot of Wine Enthusiast, Wine Advocate, and Wine Spectator reviews. I noticed that consistently in their wine reviews, you get smells, aromas, and flavors of cherries, currants, raspberries, and blackberries, et cetera, et cetera. And I started thinking, well, if that's what's really attractive about the greatest Cabernet Sauvignons or Merlots or Pinot Doni, if that's what's really attractive, why don't I just actually start working with those fruits and find out if I can create a blend that's really delicious? And so I did. I actually started looking for varieties of fruit that I could grow in my own and that I could use to create what are basically a fusion of delicious flavors, and that's how that came about. I tinkered with it for a while. It's nice. It's nice to have your own fruit, because you can, at that point, you can lose some of your inhibitions about whether or not I use 5 pounds or 10 pounds. Or no. If you've got 60 pounds of fruit that you grew yourself, you can make a couple of batches and mess around with it. And so I did. I did a lot of batches in between the time when I started to actually have the access to the fruit that I needed until I think I got it really pretty much nailed down. And at that point, that's when Brad Dahlhofer called and said, "Ken, I'm starting a meadery, and I'd like to release. I was hoping you'd be willing to be a guest mead maker for a batch or two, and we can release them as the Ken Schramm Signature Series." And that's when I said, "Listen, there's only one mead I'm making right now that I'm proud enough of to release it at all, and that's the Heart of Darkness. And so if we're going to do it, that's the one we're going to release." And we released Brad released it as the Schramm Signature Series first in 2009. I think there were 110 bottles in that release. And then it was released again. We had a really small crop in 2010 and didn't do a batch. And then we released another batch in 2011. So that's kind of the story of how that one came about. It was me chasing after a really cool flavor profile that I, kind of built in my head out of reading great reviews from Robert Parker and James Suckling.
Awesome. And I've had some of it. It's just amazing. There's like layer after layer after layer of flavor built into it. And I believe you said it's just raspberries, black currants, right?
Two varieties of raspberries. They are Heritage and Latham, and those are varieties that are commonly grown in home gardens. Heritage, in addition to being very common, is also one of the best tasting varieties that I know of. And Latham is not as bold, but it produces a really wonderful round raspberry flavor at a slightly lower level of acidity. And then I have two currants that we use, Crandall and Consort. They are the same way. One of them is much bolder and more impactful, if you will, and the other one is slightly softer but juicier and more readily accessible. And then the Belgian cherries.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. Let's talk about some of the other meads you've made. I know one of the ones I was interested in is you were talking about the black currants, the blackberry meads, the ones where you're using this high level of acidity. How do you manage to balance something that's really that tart? I mean, you take something like a black currant or a blackberry, they're extremely tart, and most of the people I know that try and make mead from them end up with something that really puckers your face.
Sure. Well, we leave a lot of sweetness. I'm not going to kid around. In most of our instances, the level of sweetness is below what you would find in the fruit juice itself. So, for example, if you take a batch of red raspberries and smash them down and test the gravity on them, the Brix reading on them, it can be 18 Brix or 16 Brix, or maybe a little lower. But at any rate, if you take our mead, it's not going to be at that same level. The finishing sweetness is not going to be quite at that same level. So you're going to still get the big impact from the acidity without quite as much sweetness as you get in the actual juice, and you get that warmth and full mouthfeel that you get from the alcohol. But it's balancing that with sweetness. And the other thing that we're really cognizant of is trying to find honeys that will deliver mouthfeel and honey impression that goes beyond the simple sweetness. That's one of the things that's important in your crafting of meads. And I'm going to diverge a little bit now exclusively from the fruit approach, but if you're going to make traditional meads as well, you have to be really cognizant of what is present in the honey that is not sweet, because that's what's going to be left once the fermentation takes away the sugar.
And that, of course, comes from the variety of honey, right? What are some of the varieties that you enjoy working with?
Well, right now we're gonna be working with some raspberry. That's one of my favorites, especially in terms of the character that it has, absent sweetness. We like orange blossom. We like really good orange blossom. We like everything that we use to be as close to raw as. When I say raw, I mean only minimally processed, heated only to the extent that it has to be heated to allow the extraction to happen from the hive and to have packaging occur. We don't want stuff that's been filtered if we can avoid it. We've used filtered honeys in the past if that's all we can attain, but if we can acquire honeys that are not filtered, they will contain more of the flavor and aroma compounds that really make the finished mead attractive. So orange blossom, I don't want to, I know I've said this in other interviews in the past, but if you're going to make a really good traditional mead, it should be made from spectacular honey. That's what Eva Crane impressed upon me the one time I got a chance to talk to her. She said, if you're gonna make spectacular mead that's just made from honey, you have to start with spectacular honey. And the honeys that we've enjoyed doing that with are things like Tasmanian leatherwood, Scottish heather. I've done some things with things like Spanish lavender that were delicious, and French lavender. None of that stuff actually got released. I have done some things with some American honeys. The stuff that I've enjoyed immensely has been things that are either light and beautifully floral, or just absolutely slam the hammer down, authoritative, hit you in the face honeys. If you don't like heather honey, you're not going to like our heather mead. It's going to be divisive. It's going to create people who are challenged by it if that's a honey that's too much for you. But on the other hand, if you like it, and the same thing is true with Tasmanian leatherwood. The Tasmanian leatherwood is a honey from a branch of the eucalyptus family from that island off the south of Australia, and it's like opening a florist shop when you pop the cork on one of those things, but it's also too much for some people.
So Ken, do you have any advice for homebrewers working with fresh fruit? I mean, do you prefer, for example, working in the primary, fruit in the primary, fruit in the secondary? Obviously you got to work through, dilution issues, because when you add fruit in the secondary, you dilute it a little bit. Your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that I envy home brewers, and I envy the flexibility that they have, because at this point as a professional mead maker, it's really important that we kind of keep things moving through the stages of the process and go from the start of the batch to being able to recoup the money that we've invested, sort of as in as straight a path as we can. So we're doing all of our fruit in the primary right now, and then transferring to secondary and hoping that the clarification will take care of stuff on the usual schedule. And it precludes us doing the thick kinds of things that I used to love to do in the past. I liked to put fruit in the secondary. I liked the fact that you can really extract a little bit more flavor and aroma, and that the aromas can sometimes be a little more impactful and a little bolder if you put the fruit in the secondary. But we don't really have that option anymore. If we were to put fruit in a secondary, it's going to stretch out the process another 30 or 60 days, and that's time we can't afford, really. So I envy homebrewers that flexibility, and it does take a little more homework. You've got to do a little more planning, but you can add more honey and you can make a more concentrated product right at the beginning. And as long as you're using a yeast like 71B, for example, that will stand up to that kind of additional sugar content, you can get yourself to exactly where you want to be with your finished product in terms of alcohol levels and flavor concentrations, and get that to happen. So I don't have a preference either way. I like that sometimes fruit additions in the primary help the flavors and the aromas to meld perhaps a little sooner in the process, and that the aging and the drinkability happen maybe a few weeks or months earlier in the process. But really, if you are a home mead maker and you've got the ability to leave things in secondary or tertiary for 6 months or a year, well, that's magnificent. And I certainly still feel that, even though a lot of our meads make it into bottle before they're 5 or 6 months old, that they will continue to improve for long periods of time, up to years. Nothing I think that we've made so far at Schram's Mead is at its peak at this point. So I'm envious. I'm envious of the opportunity that home brewers have to be as creative and as explicit and determined, I guess that's a good word.
Sounds good.
as they can be with their process. Use whatever works extremely well for you, and if what you want is that little bit more oomph at the end, feel free.
I like to think of it as dry hopping with fruit. That's kind of how I think.
Absolutely. I'd love to have that kind of flexibility, but if we do that, then we're right back to where we started on a clarity. So
right, exactly. Well, Ken, mead, obviously mead fermentation techniques have changed quite a bit since you wrote your book. What kind of nutrient schedule are you using now? Are you using I think the newest ones like Tonsa 2 or something like that, right?
Yeah, the organic staggered nutrient additions, and we're not. We're still using diammonium phosphate, and I'm very comfortable with it. I am not as comfortable with using the levels of nutrient that are required if you're going to use Fermate O, which is the totally organic approach.
That seems to be the trend at the moment.
Well, you've got to use a lot of it. And that means leaving an awful lot of yeast hulls in your liquid that you don't need to have there. The thing that's attractive about diammonium phosphate is it's virtually entirely utilized by the yeast. There's nothing left of it when the yeast is done with it. And if you're not overutilizing nutrient and you're not nutrifying to levels that are going to leave residual content behind, I don't spot a downside with it myself. I've been studying a thing called the ILV chain, which is isoleucine, leucine, and valine. Those are three of the organic three of the amino acids, that are involved in reproduction. They are involved in cell wall buildup, and they're also the three that are responsible for the production of fusel alcohols. And I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the fact that certain honeys may have elevated levels of isoleucine, leucine, and valine, and that may be responsible for some of the jet fuel character that is found in some meads.
Yeah, I've noticed if you ferment them really fast using some of these new aggressive techniques, they definitely have a jet fuel character initially. Now, usually a lot of that fades out over time, but yeah, that's. But
if you specifically go on and get the MSDS sheets on things like isobutanol, for example, or amyl alcohol, they're very long-lived. The notion that those are going to soften up over a long time I don't believe that's correct. They have really long half-lives, and they're going to be present in your mead for a while. I'm looking for stuff that just, I don't want them in there at all. I want the meads that I'm making to be crisp and clean and no caffeine.
Yeah. So you're still using diammonium phosphate, I guess, and I don't know, you're using Grow Firm at the beginning or something like that?
We're doing the Go Firm. We're doing the full boat rehydration process.
Right.
And then we are nutrifying at levels that if we've got it accurate, are not quite to the full levels that Bisson and Butsky recommended in the chart that's floating around out there. It's in the Optimizing Honey Fermentation article that talks about the levels of free amino nitrate or YAN that you're going to want to attain to have a clean fermentation at various gravities and desired alcohol percentages at the close of the fermentation. We shoot a little low. We shoot below those levels so that we are certain that we're not leaving behind nutrient that can be utilized by other organisms. And since we're using whole fruit, it's going to come with some unintended friends, we know. And
Absolutely.
we want to make sure that at the end of our fermentation, the only thing that might be left behind is a little bit of sugar, and we're not leaving behind unused nitrogen or magnesium or other nutrients or micronutrients or minerals that the competing microorganisms might want to have to continue their metabolic processes.
And then, of course, the other thing that people have been doing recently is degassing and aerating, and I wondered your thoughts on that. Some mead makers are pretty aggressive with their degassing and aeration, particularly the first 2/3 of the fermentation or so.
Yeah. For us, it's about the first third of the fermentation, and we're pretty good about the degassing thing. When I say degassing, we're doing fruit fermentations, and we are doing punch downs, and the punch downs are occurring for us for the first 6 or 7 days of the fermentation, and sometimes only once a day, sometimes twice a day, but each time we are degassing as thoroughly as we can, and we're doing it with the punch down tool. We're not doing it with
you probably don't have a giant drill with a paint stirrer on it, right?
We could come up with something along those lines, but we're just doing the slow and gentle process. It takes us about 20 minutes to punch down a tank. If we do it right and we go through it methodically and then go back at it for another couple of passes around the entire circumference of the tank. But yeah, we degas regularly, and we degas all of our meads, whether they are fruit meads or spice meads or traditionals. Everything gets 4 to 6 or 7, sometimes 8 days.
Well, we're actually coming near the end of my time, Ken, and I know your time is valuable, but I wondered if you had any closing advice for somebody that's either looking to get into meads or looking to improve their current meads.
Sure. I will say that quality ingredients. It's intimidating and it's expensive, but if you look at the value of great wines and meads on the shelf, they're not cheap. They're not cheap because they can't be, but by the same token, if you're going to go ahead and buy the quantities of fruit and the quality of honey that make great mead, your per bottle cost as a home mead maker could get as high as $6 or $7 or $10 a bottle. But when you compare that with what you're going to spend to get a truly high quality mead or a really fantastic wine, a Sauterne or any great wine, a dessert wine out of California, out of the Napa Valley, or an ice wine, for example, they're not cheap. They're not cheap, and you can still have the economics work very much in your favor if you do the work up front to get great ingredients. There's just no substitute for that. I know a lot of people want to believe that you can make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It's not true in brewing. The great brewers use great malts. They use the best hops they can get their hands on, and there's nothing that makes the math or the reasoning, the logic of that work, meaning cheap ingredients in mead. It just doesn't. And once you get to the point where you've tasted 12 or 15 really outstanding meads on a table in front of you, you can pick out the ones that were made with great ingredients. It's just not deniable. The cream rises to the top.
Yeah, I found just talking to people around here, a lot of people have never had good mead. and literally they don't know what it tastes like. They're like, "Oh yeah, I had some mead. It wasn't very good." And I'm like, you didn't have good mead then, you know?
Right. No, it is the beverage of kings. And interestingly, I've spoken with Patrick McGovern, who was the guy that wrote Ancient Wine and Uncorking the Past, and he truly believes too that great fermented beverages, whether they were beers or meads or wines throughout history, the greatest have always been great. You couldn't be the mead maker to the king and not be producing things that were spectacular, because they would find the next guy in line who was going to make something that was really delicious.
After they chop your head off, right?
After you pay the ultimate price. But I truly believe that great meads have been great for a long, long time, and we're just following up with that. Right? I believe if you wanted another quick phrase, we're in the golden age of mead right now. We are in an era when you can have delivered to your door the best ingredients that are available anywhere in the world, and as long as you're willing to spend the money on them, you can have the tools to have a spectacular fermentation and the ingredients to create a spectacular recipe. And it's just a matter of doing the upfront work to collect them and to know what you're doing to make a great mead. And it is the stuff of kings, because it is that delicious when you get done.
And if you want some of the best meads in the world and you happen to be near Detroit, Michigan, highly encourage you to drop by Ken's Meadery. Ken, where are you located, and when do you actually have time for people to come in?
We are open. The tasting room is on 9 Mile Road. It's at 327 West 9 Mile Road. You can Google us up.
Just Google Schram's Meadery.
It is schramsmead.com. There's no apostrophe in there, but schramsmead.com. And we're pretty easy to find, but we're at 327 West 9 Mile Road in Ferndale, and we are open Wednesday through Sunday. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we are open in the evenings. Saturday, we're open from 1 o'clock until midnight, and Sunday, we are open 1 to 6. So we try to be open as much as we can, and we also try to have as many interesting things on at the tap room, at the tasting room as we can. There'll be things there that are not available in bottles, and there'll be things there that will be making their way into our product line. So if you're interested in trying some things that you can, if you're one of those people that likes to check things off, you can check things off before they've actually hit the streets.
So if you haven't had good mead, highly encourage you to check out Schram's Meadery near Detroit. Again, Ken, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been trying to get you on for a long time. Really appreciate you being here.
Brad, it was my pleasure, and thanks for all you do for home brewers. I know you have spread the word about many, many great topics and techniques, and thanks for the dedication that you bring to the craft.
Well, thank you, Ken. Yeah, really appreciate you. You really turned me on to meads too as well, and so thank you for that. Again, today my guest was Ken Schramm. He is the founder of Schram's Meadery, author of the book The Compleat Meadmaker, and again a fantastic mazer. Thanks, Ken.
It's been my pleasure.
Well, a big thank you to Ken Schramm for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue is packed with great information for homebrewers and craft beer fans. Take advantage of their fantastic sale and get a 1-year subscription now for only $19.99 from beerandbrewing.com. And also Blickman Engineering, creators of the Cornicle combined fermentation and kegging system. Ferment in a keg with a conical bottom attachment, and then just swap the bottom out, carbonate, and serve from the same keg. Find out more about the Cornicle at blickmanengineering.com. And finally, BeerSmith software, the industry standard for home and professional brewers that lets you design great beer recipes and brew with confidence. Download your free 21-day trial today at beersmith.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great brewing week.